Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum. In today's video, I'll be dealing with one of the strongest arguments against evolution, that is protein evolution and the waiting times problem. Let's get started. Now, I did make an earlier video on this topic, and I would recommend you watch that one before watching this one because that one's extremely important, and I go into this topic even in more depth there, and that video isn't very long. I would recommend you watch that, but even if you don't, I'll try to make this as accessible as possible. So before I go any further, I'll give a very simple analogy. Suppose there is a lottery where the odds of one person winning is 1 divided by 1000, and 1000 people participate in the lottery. In this scenario, it's probable that one person can win this lottery, right? We multiply these two things, that will give us how many people it is likely that will win the lottery. And I think it's clear cut in this regard. Suppose the odds of one person winning is 1 divided by 500 and 1000 people participate. In this case, it is probable that two people will win this lottery, right? We multiply these two things. Suppose the odds of winning a lottery is 1 over a million and 1000 people participate. In this case, it is highly unlikely that even one person will win the lottery in this scenario. Keep this in mind, this is relevant to the topic, the problem I am bringing up. Now let's go to the argument. And this relates to number of mutations, and you will see why soon. For life to exist as it does right now, countless beneficial mutations would have to have taken place in the history of life. I don't think anyone can deny this. Literally, countless proteins exist that cause beneficial that lead to important functions in countless amounts of lives, from animals to us to plants, etc. Right? There are approximately 10 to the power 40 species in the history of life. This is the maximum number of mutations. You can't have number of mutations greater than this. Keep this in mind. If the ratio of beneficial mutations to non-beneficial mutations is less than 1 divided by 10 to the power 40, then there is not enough time for one beneficial mutation to have taken place in the history of life. This relates to the problem I brought up earlier regarding the lottery, right? This follows from that. Here's the problem for Darwinists. Multiple studies show that the ratio of beneficial mutations to non-beneficial mutations is much lower than this. So it's basically similar to the third scenario, except where the odds are 1 divided by a million and 1000 people are participating, except in this case the odds are much lower than this. This is the problem for Darwinists. So basically the entire argument depends on the probability being lower than 1 divided by 10 to the power 40. Keep this in mind. There are multiple studies that show this. In fact, the reason I am making this video again is that there was a contention made that there are some studies that show the ratio is greater than this, so proteins are possible in the history of life. I'll deal with that contention as well, but before that I'll give some independent references for the ratio of beneficial mutations to be lower than 1 divided by 10 to the power 40. This is the first study. This was done in 1990. In this regard, again, these are mainstream evolutionary biologists in mainstream evolutionary biology journals. This is our second study. This was done in 1977. This shows the ratio to be 1 divided by 10 to the power 65. Again, much lower than 1 divided by 10 to the power 40. This is a study that was done in 2006. That showed the ratio to be 1 divided by 10 to the power 70. So multiple studies are showing that the ratio is lower than this. This is why proteins are improbable. Even formation of one protein is improbable in the history of life, and that's why the problem exists. Now there are multiple contentions to this, but to be honest, the other ones are not really important. This is the key contention, and this is the one I want to deal with. There are some studies that have ratios greater than 1 divided by 10 to the power 40. So the claim is these proteins and proteins in general, because of this, can evolve by chance in the history of life. This does not work. and I'll explain soon why. Now, since there are some studies that do have such ratios, right? But does this show all beneficial mutations can arrive by chance or just those specific mutations? I think at face value it just shows those specific mutations can arrive by chance. It doesn't show that all or majority of protein or majority of mutations can arrive by chance. This does not show that. But here's the thing, you don't need to take my word on this. There's actually a significant problem here in this regard, and I'll soon explain why. The ratios that are greater than 1 divided by 10 to the power 40, they are generally for smaller proteins. And here's why this first I'll explain the point about smaller proteins. Proteins have varying lengths, meaning they have different amounts of amino acids in their chain. If suppose a protein has 50 amino acids in its chain, it's a shorter protein than a protein that has 200 amino acids in this chain. The length of a protein is given by number of amino acids. The ratios that are greater than 10 to the power 40 are generally 1 over 10 to the power 40 are generally for proteins which are shorter. Let's take a study. This was brought up by an atheist, and again, this particular study showed that a particular mutation has a ratio, a beneficial mutation has a ratio of 1 divided by 10 to the power 40, 24. This is clearly much lower than this is clearly much greater than 1 divided by 10 to the power 40. Hence, this can evolve in the history of life by chance. But here's the problem for atheists. This protein only has 93 amino acids. The average length of a protein is 300 amino acids. And here's something that atheists themselves will accept. In fact, they brought this up. The longer the length of the protein, the lower this probability has to be. So if for a 93 chain amino acid, the probability is 1 divided by 10 to the power 24, this probability will certainly fall much below 1 divided by 10 to the power 40 for a protein of average length of 300 amino acids. And if that's the case, this clearly proves, and this very strongly proves, that for average length proteins the probability will be much lower than 1 divided by 10 to the power 40. If that's the case, they cannot evolve in the history of life by chance. And if that's the case, evolution, at least in the Darwinian sense that it has been argued for the past 150 years, it is necessarily false. There is simply no way around this. Because again, and by the way, the principle I am using here, longer the protein, the smaller the ratio, this is something that atheists themselves brought up to try to refute this argument. There is literally no way around this argument, because even if we take the principle they are bringing up, and it is a correct one, and then we apply to average protein lengths, their argument fails. It literally fails. Now, this was the basic refutation of the atheist claim, but there are some further problems in this regard as well, and I thought it is really important to mention these. Firstly, understand this point. The point I am making is not something that is just made up by ID proponents. Mainstream evolutionary biologists and authorities in the field of protein evolution recognize this problem. Dan Tawfiq, who is an authority in the field and is certainly not an intelligent design proponent, described the originations of proteins as something close to a miracle. That is how improbable these are, and that is how improbable these are according to mainstream evolutionary biologists. Moreover, the number of mutations that I gave is extremely generous, 1 divided by 10 to the power 40. Why? Because most species do not mutate. Mutations are extremely rare. So the number of mutations is actually much smaller than 1 divided by 10 to that ratio is much smaller than 10 to the power 40. It has to be. Moreover, the number 10 to the power 40 is considering bacteria. Most of these are bacteria. The number for animals and plants and complex life is orders of magnitude smaller than bacteria. So again, this problem is like these numbers I have been using are the ones that are most generous to the Darwinists, and still their problem isn't solved. And if we take numbers for if we ignore bacteria, we take number for other animals, for plants and animals, the problem is just much greater than that. Moreover, all of this talk, all of this video is talking about the probability of one functional protein fold emerging. For life to exist as it does right now, countless functional proteins folds would have to emerge. So again, this is me being the most generous I can be to the Darwinist, and still evolution fails massively. Inshallah, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Inshallah, I'll keep refuting these clowns. Till next time, Assalamu alaikum.